Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Hall Training, and welcome to this tutorial where I'm just going to talk about the anatomy of the spine and some of its functions, because that in itself starts to explain and paint a picture of how we exercise the spine, stretch the spine, how we use the spine in everyday life. And then what you can then do is then link that into flexibility training, core training, strength training, fitness training, whatever it might be. But essentially we want to be keeping the spine healthy throughout. So what you'll be able to understand, or what I'll start to explain as we work through this, is how to go about doing that based on just the simple sort of anatomy of the spine. So if we start from the bare bones, excuse the pun, but basically we've got vertebrae all the way up the spine, and then we've got discs in between. So they're just little segments. Then we've got sort of three basic sections of the spine. There are more, but we're just going to focus on the lumbar, which is the lower spine, the thoracic, which is the middle part of the spine, and then the cervical, which is the upper part of the spine. So the cervical is essentially, let's just call it the neck. Then we've got the thoracic, which is the mid to upper parts of the spine, or the back, and then we've got the lumbar, which is the lower part of the spine. So those are the three sections. Now, with regards to the vertebrae, they start out slightly bigger at the bottom, and then as they go up, they get slightly shorter as we go up. Now, the ones at the bottom, so the lower part of the spine, they are known as load-bearing vertebrae because they're slightly bigger and they have less range of movement. As we then go up the spine, they get smaller, but what happens is as they get smaller, there is greater range of movement at that part of the spine. And then it ends with the atlas and the axis at the very top, which has the greatest range of movement. So what we can start to understand from just simple things like that is that certainly the lower part of the spine is known as load-bearing. So it's not essentially a movement part of the spine. That's not its primary function. As we go up, then it has greater ranges of movement. So with regards to exercising and moving the spine, we don't really want to be moving the lower part of the spine, but we are able to move the more upper portions of the spine, and which includes the neck as well. So that starts to paint a picture with regards to the exercises that we start to choose and how we perform those exercises. If we then just take it a step further and just bring in the hips and the shoulders are a ball and socket joint. They are known as a freely movable joint, and they have greater ranges of movement. If we go to the spine, it's known as a slightly movable joint because of the slightly movable segments all the way up the spine. So what we can start to understand if we bring in the hips and the shoulders, that freely movable joints should be moved. Slightly movable joints aren't necessarily there to be used. It's not their primary function. So as I describe it, the primary function of the shoulders and the hips is to create movement. The primary function of the spine is to be stable. How we create that stability is the musculature around it. So we need that to act like guy wires. So if you've ever put up a tent and you see the guy wires, that is there that when the wind blows, the tent stays rigid and in place. That's what the musculature of the core is there to do. That's why the musculature, the fibres go in all these different directions, because it acts like carbon fibre. It's a very light but very rigid structure. So when we tense the abdominals, or when we tense the abdominal wall, we are creating stiffness and stability around the lumbar part of the spine to create a taut guy wire to be able to hold the spine in place, while the big muscles, the glutes, the quads, the pecs, the lats that move the hips and the shoulders, whilst they create the movement. So just by looking at these simple parts of the anatomy and their function, we start to paint a picture. Now, this is a very, let's just say, high-level overview of how the spine works, how we move, so on and so forth. The spine can move, as I've mentioned. It's just not its primary function. We do need movement at the spine, but we need to be sensible with how much and where that movement is. So yes, what I'm saying, there are caveats and nuances and greater context to be put in place, but what we need to be able to do is start from a base of the basic fundamentals, which is the spine. The primary function of the spine is there to be stable. That's made stable by the musculature acting like guy wires. So we don't train them with sit-ups and crunches because we are creating movement at the spine. We want to prevent movement of the spine, to hold it in place, to keep it stable, to hold the spine up. We want to create movement at the freely movable joints of the ball and sockets, at the hips and the shoulders. So we create the power using the big muscles, the glutes, the quads, the pecs, the lats, so on and so forth. So we create the movement, we create the power, we create the force there. We then use the abdominal wall to be able to lock down the lumbar part of the spine whilst we create that movement. So just from that, you can start to see and start to sort of see the landscape that is being put in place. Now again, this is exactly how I'm describing it. I'm just trying to paint a basic outline of how it works. I'm not putting in the small little bits of detail, not the leaves on the tree, which are very refined detail and things like that. I'm not going down that road. I'm just trying to get a view of the overall picture and just putting in the basic outlines of where everything can go. What you find a lot of people doing when they talk about movement training and movement of the spine is they're trying to put in the greater detail without looking at the basic overview and the fundamentals of the spine and how it integrates with the shoulders and the hips, so on and so forth. So if we start from there, we can then grow into that rather than starting from trying to do complex movement, because there's another layer that comes into that, is the person's, the person's focus on being able to concentrate on big movements and multiple joints and multiple muscles working at the same time. I know from working with a lot of people that when I do a big movement with them and ask them, how did your shoulders feel, how did your hips feel, how did your knees feel, how did all the muscles feel, they go, I wasn't focusing on that, I was just focusing on getting the weight from there to there. So that tells me their brain can't cope with that. When they become more refined at that movement and being able to focus on, okay, this is what my knees doing, this is what my hips doing, this is what my shoulders are doing, this is what my elbows are doing, wrists, hands, so on and so forth, then they would be able to give me an answer to that. So it's very much starting from the basics, and that's what I mean when I'm talking about the basics, when I'm exercising people, when I'm giving advice to people, is I'm coming from the basics and I'm trying to paint that picture. It might not give you all the answers and every answer that you need, but it's where we need to start to build the foundation to be able to grow on top of it. Because again, as I always describe to people, you never find a good house builder that builds a house with zero foundation. They've got to start from the foundation and then build up. You never see them going, right, let's put the roof on, then let's put the top floor on, then the second floor, then the first floor, then the ground floor, then the foundations. It's always foundations first, ground first, second, top floor, roof, so on and so forth. This is what I'm trying to do with anatomy, and then movement, and then exercise, and how it's taught. So hopefully that gives you a better understanding of some simple anatomy of the spine and how it integrates with not only the muscles of it, but also the joints around it, being the shoulders and the hips. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris. I'll speak to you in another tutorial.